My mom cries every time she sees that ring. The sentence was soft, almost swallowed by the music. But somehow, inside the Grand Aurora Ballroom, it landed harder than the sound of breaking glass. Nathaniel Hale stopped mid-sentence on stage. The silver lights above him reflected against crystal chandeliers the size of small cars, scattering cold diamonds across the ceiling of the hotel ballroom. Around him stood senators, investors, celebrities, and CEOs worth more money than entire towns. Champagne shimmered inside delicate glasses. A string quartet played near the marble staircase. Waiters in white gloves moved like ghosts between tables covered in black silk and gold candlelight. Everything about the room smelled expensive. Leather, perfume, aged whiskey, polished wood. Wealth had a scent, and tonight it hung thick in the air. Nathaniel Hale knew that scent better than anyone. At 48 years old, he had built Hale Dynamics into one of the largest tech companies in America. Business magazines called him the man who predicted the future. Financial reporters described him as ruthless, brilliant, untouchable. He stood at the center of the ballroom in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, one hand resting lightly against the podium while cameras flashed like summer lightning around him. And yet none of those flashing lights disturbed him the way that tiny voice just had. "Sir?" The little girl said again from somewhere below the stage. "My mother has a ring just like yours." A faint ripple moved through the crowd. Annoyed glances. Confused whispers. Security near the front instantly stiffened. Nathaniel slowly lowered his eyes. And there she was. Small, pale, thin shoulders wrapped in a simple navy blue dress that looked carefully ironed despite its age. Blonde hair tied back with a faded ribbon. She couldn't have been older than 9. The child stood near one of the serving stations clutching a silver tray almost too large for her arms. She looked completely out of place beneath the ballroom's glittering lights, like a sketch accidentally left inside a museum painting. A woman near the front table leaned toward another guest with a tight smile. "Why is there a child working tonight?" she whispered. "Probably staff family," the other muttered without looking twice. The girl heard them. Nathaniel could tell by the way her fingers tightened around the tray. But she didn't look embarrassed. She only looked at the ring. His ring. A cold sensation slid quietly down Nathaniel's spine. The platinum band on his hand was custom-made over a decade ago. There was only one matching ring in existence. Just one. He knew because he designed them himself. The ballroom suddenly felt warmer. Smaller. Tighter somehow. "Sweetheart," one of the security guards said carefully as he approached her. "You need to step away from the stage." The girl looked frightened for half a second. Then she glanced back at Nathaniel. Her blue eyes were steady in a way children's eyes rarely were. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I just noticed it because my mommy keeps one in a little blue box under her bed. She cries when she looks at it." Silence spread slowly across the nearest tables. Nathaniel's heartbeat stumbled once inside his chest. Somewhere far behind him, cameras continued clicking, but the sound now felt distant, muffled, like rain hitting windows in another building. The little girl shifted awkwardly under the weight of the tray. She says it reminds her of someone who forgot her. For the first time in years, Nathaniel Hale forgot what he was supposed to say next. The silence lasted only 3 seconds. But inside the Grand Aurora Ballroom, 3 seconds was enough time for an empire to crack. Nathaniel Hale stared at the little girl as though the room had suddenly tilted beneath his feet. Around him, the wealthy guests shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, unsure whether they were witnessing a touching misunderstanding or a disaster unfolding in real time. The string quartet near the staircase kept playing softly, but now the music sounded strange against the tension hanging in the air. Thin, fragile. Nathaniel slowly stepped away from the podium. His polished shoes crossed the black marble stage with measured calm, but inside his chest, something old and buried had begun to wake up. He stopped directly in front of the child. Up close. She looked even smaller beneath the ballroom lights. Her hands were pink from carrying the cold silver tray too long. A tiny scratch marked one side of her wrist, probably from kitchen work. Nathaniel noticed details for a living. That was how he built billion-dollar companies. But tonight, the detail he could not stop staring at was her eyes. Blue. Deep blue. Familiar blue. "What is your mother's name?" he asked quietly. The question came out rougher than he intended. The girl hesitated. Somewhere behind her, A sharply dressed event manager hurried forward wearing the strained smile of someone desperate to prevent embarrassment. "Sir, I apologize," the woman whispered quickly. "She is one of the catering staff children. We can remove her immediately." "Remove her?" The words hit the child instantly. Nathaniel saw her shoulders tighten, saw the practiced fear in her expression, the fear of becoming inconvenient, invisible. "No," Nathaniel said without looking away from the girl. His voice cut through the ballroom like clean glass. The event manager froze. "She stays." The room went still again. Near the front tables, reporters subtly lowered their phones. Investors exchanged confused glances. Nobody had seen Nathaniel Hale speak gently to anyone in years. The girl swallowed nervously. "My mom's name is Emily Carter," she said softly. The moment the name left her mouth, the world narrowed. Nathaniel felt it physically, like air leaving the room. Emily Carter. 10 years vanished in a heartbeat. Rain against a windshield. A small downtown jazz club glowing amber beneath winter lights. A girl laughing while piano music drifted through cigarette smoke and coffee steam. Emily. The memory hit so suddenly that Nathaniel nearly lost his balance. He had not heard that name spoken aloud in years. Not since the accident. Not since the months the doctors called the missing period. A season of fractured memory and blank spaces nobody could fully explain. Nathaniel blinked hard, forcing himself back into the ballroom. "Sir?" the little girl asked carefully. "Are you okay?" He realized everyone was staring at him now. The untouchable billionaire, standing speechless before a catering worker's child. Nathaniel straightened slowly. His hand unconsciously touched the platinum ring on his finger. Cold metal. Familiar weight. A symbol he had worn for over a decade without ever fully understanding why he could never take it off. "Where is your mother tonight?" he asked. "In the kitchen," the girl answered. She almost did not come because she was nervous. Nathaniel's heartbeat quickened. Somewhere beyond the ballroom doors, behind polished hallways and silver serving carts, was a woman he once loved enough to design a future around. Or at least that was what the fractured corners of his memory were beginning to whisper. Then the girl said something that made his chest tighten all over again. "She still waits for someone," Sophie said quietly. I think maybe she stopped believing he was coming back. The ballroom no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a room full of strangers pretending not to stare. Nathaniel Hale stood motionless beneath the chandelier light, while Sophie Carter clutched the silver serving tray against her chest. Around them, the city's most powerful people whispered carefully behind raised champagne glasses, pretending sophistication could hide curiosity. But curiosity was spreading through the room like smoke. Nathaniel could feel it. He had spent 20 years controlling every room he entered. Every interview, every board meeting, every negotiation. Control was his language. Yet one little girl with a faded ribbon in her hair had just shattered it with a single sentence. Sophie shifted her weight nervously. "I should probably go back now," she whispered. "Mom says rich people do not like scenes." Nathaniel looked down at her. The sentence hurt more than it should have, because she had not said it with anger. She had said it like a fact she learned too young. Nearby, a waiter brushed past carrying crystal glasses filled with sparkling water. The scent of rosemary and citrus drifted briefly through the cold ballroom air. Somewhere behind the orchestra stage, soft laughter erupted from another group of guests completely unaware that Nathaniel Hale's entire world had just tilted sideways. "Who told you about the ring?" he asked quietly. Sophie glanced toward the ballroom entrance leading to the service hallway. "Nobody," she said. "I just saw it." Her blue eyes lowered toward his hand again. "My mom keeps hers inside a tiny blue jewelry box with flowers painted on top. She only opens it when she thinks I am asleep." Nathaniel swallowed carefully. Tiny details surfaced inside his mind without warning. Blue paint, white flowers, rain-tapping apartment windows. Emily sitting cross-legged on a hardwood floor laughing softly while music played from an old record player. The memory flashed like lightning behind fog. Incomplete, broken apart, but real. For years, Nathaniel had lived with strange gaps in his past after the car accident that nearly killed him 10 years earlier. Doctors called it trauma-related memory loss. His assistants called it unfortunate, but manageable. Nathaniel himself had learned not to question the empty spaces too deeply. He focused on work instead. Numbers, expansion, acquisitions. Success was easier than memory. But now those missing years no longer felt empty. They felt stolen. Sir, Sophie asked carefully, did I say something bad? Nathaniel blinked. No, he answered quickly. No, sweetheart. The softness in his own voice surprised him. Sophie relaxed slightly, though her small fingers still gripped the tray tightly enough for her knuckles to pale beneath the ballroom lights. My mommy gets sad when she sees people wearing rings like yours, Sophie admitted quietly. Not angry sad. More like, she searched for the word. Lonely. Nathaniel felt something tighten painfully behind his ribs. Lonely. He knew that feeling well. His penthouse overlooking Manhattan had 20-foot windows, imported marble floors, and enough empty silence to drown a person slowly. Success had surrounded him with people, but somehow removed him from all of them at the same time. Every morning began with meetings. Every night ended with numbers glowing across giant screens in dark offices. And somewhere during all those years, he had stopped asking himself why he felt so hollow. Sophie looked toward the ballroom doors again. I should really go before my mom worries. Nathaniel nodded slowly, but before she could leave, a voice suddenly interrupted from behind them. Sophie. The word arrived breathless and frightened. Nathaniel turned. Standing near the ballroom entrance was a woman in a black catering uniform, holding a folded linen cloth tightly in trembling hands. Her blonde hair was loosely pinned back, though several strands had escaped around her face from hours of work. Exhaustion rested beneath her eyes, but it could not hide the quiet beauty still lingering there. Nathaniel forgot how to breathe. Emily Carter stared at him from across the ballroom, like she had just seen a ghost. For one suspended moment, neither of them moved. The ballroom faded into a blur of gold light and distant music while Emily Carter stood frozen near the entrance, staring directly at Nathaniel Hale, as though time itself had cracked open beneath her feet. The folded linen cloth in her hands slipped slightly. Sophie turned immediately. Mom. Emily looked down at her daughter first, relief and panic colliding across her face at the same time. Then her eyes lifted slowly back toward Nathaniel. The color drained from her expression. 10 years disappeared in silence. Nathaniel saw it happen in her eyes before she spoke a single word. Shock, hurt, memory, the kind of pain that never fully leaves a person, no matter how many years pass over it. Emily swallowed hard. Sophie, she said softly, her voice trembling. Come here, sweetheart. Sophie obeyed instantly, carrying the silver tray carefully through the crowd until she reached her mother's side. Nathaniel noticed the way Emily immediately rested one protective hand against the little girl's shoulder. Instinctive, protective, like she had spent years shielding her daughter from the world. Around them, conversations had nearly stopped entirely. Wealthy guests pretended to sip champagne while openly watching the scene unfold. A famous news anchor subtly angled her phone camera lower beneath the table. Even the orchestra seemed quieter now, their soft piano notes drifting through the ballroom like distant rain. Nathaniel stepped off the stage completely. His polished shoes touched the marble floor. With slow, deliberate movements, Emily's breathing visibly tightened as he approached. Emily, he said quietly. Her name felt unfamiliar and deeply familiar at the same time, like a song remembered only halfway. Emily looked away for a brief second, blinking rapidly. You remember my name? She whispered. Nathaniel opened his mouth, but no answer came immediately, because the truth was terrifying. He remembered pieces, fragments. Her laugh beneath city lights, coffee cups stacked beside old sheet music, a tiny apartment with cracked windows and warm yellow lamps. But the rest was missing, torn away somewhere inside the blank years after the accident. Emily studied his face carefully, as if searching for something she no longer trusted herself to hope for. I did not think you would recognize me, she admitted softly. Nathaniel stared at her. I do not understand why I forgot you. The honesty in his voice startled even himself. Emily's eyes shimmered instantly. Not dramatic tears. The quiet kind people carry after surviving disappointment too many times. Sophie looked nervously between them. Mom, she whispered. Do you know him? Emily closed her eyes briefly before answering. A long time ago, she said carefully. I knew someone who looked very much like him. The sentence landed gently, but Nathaniel felt every word like weight pressing into his chest. Someone who looked very much like him. Not him. Not anymore. A nearby investor awkwardly cleared his throat, Trying to pretend the emotional tension in the room was not making everyone uncomfortable. Nathaniel ignored all of them. For the first time in years, the opinions of powerful people felt meaningless beside one exhausted woman in a catering uniform. His gaze dropped briefly toward Sophie. The little girl had Emily's smile, but her eyes? Nathaniel felt cold realization crawl slowly through him. Those eyes looked exactly like his mother's eyes. Emily noticed the change in his expression immediately. Fear flashed across her face. Real fear. "Sophie," she said gently, "why do not you wait in the hallway for me, sweetheart?" "But Mom, please." Sophie hesitated, then nodded quietly and disappeared toward the service corridor carrying the tray. The second she was gone, silence settled heavily between them. Nathaniel looked at Emily as the ballroom lights reflected softly against the tears gathering in her eyes. "Emily," he said carefully, "is Sophie my daughter?" Emily's breath caught so sharply it was almost a sound of pain, and for the first time all night, she looked directly into his eyes without hiding her heartbreak. "You really do not remember," she whispered. The question lingered between them like smoke trapped beneath glass. Emily stood perfectly still beneath the ballroom lights while tears gathered silently in her eyes. Around them, the Grand Aurora Ballroom continued glowing with luxury and music and crystal and wealth, but none of it mattered anymore. Nathaniel Hale felt as though the entire world had narrowed down to one exhausted woman staring at him with heartbreak too old to hide. "You really do not remember," Emily whispered again. Nathaniel shook his head slowly. "I remember pieces," he admitted, "but not enough." His voice sounded raw now. Human, not the polished voice investors heard on television interviews. Emily looked down briefly, pressing trembling fingers against the linen cloth in her hands as though grounding herself. "After the accident," she said softly, "your assistant came to the hospital." Nathaniel frowned immediately. "Hospital?" Emily nodded once. "You had already been transferred to a private recovery center by then. They said your injuries were severe. They said you needed isolation while your memory stabilized." Nathaniel stared at her. Every sentence felt like someone opening locked doors inside his mind. "I tried to see you," Emily continued quietly. "3 times. The ballroom lights reflected faintly against the tears finally slipping down her cheeks. "But they would not let me near you." Nathaniel felt cold anger stir somewhere deep beneath his confusion. "Who stopped you?" Emily laughed softly then, but there was no happiness in the sound. Only exhaustion. People with expensive suits and polite smiles. Nathaniel already knew exactly what that meant. Damage control, reputation management, corporate protection. His company had entire departments dedicated to controlling narratives during crises. And suddenly he realized with growing horror that someone may have decided Emily did not fit the future they wanted for him after the accident. A catering worker, a struggling musician, a pregnant woman from a tiny apartment in Brooklyn. Nathaniel's chest tightened painfully. "I wrote letters," Emily whispered. "So many letters." Nathaniel swallowed hard. "I never saw them." "I know." The answer came immediately. Not angry. Somehow that hurt more. Emily looked toward the glittering ballroom around them, toward the billionaires and investors and polished perfection. "After a while, I stopped believing they were lying to me," she admitted softly. "I thought maybe you woke up and decided you did not want us anymore." Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly. The sentence hit him harder than any business failure ever had. Somewhere inside his fractured memories, he could almost hear himself laughing with her in some tiny apartment kitchen while rain tapped against windows. He could almost remember promising her forever, and yet 10 years had vanished. 10 years Emily spent believing she had been abandoned. "Emily," he said quietly, "I would never knowingly leave my child." Her expression broke slightly at the word "my," not because she doubted him, because part of her had waited years to hear him say it. The orchestra music drifted softly across the ballroom. A lonely piano melody now, slow and aching beneath the crystal lights. Emily wiped her eyes carefully before speaking again. "Sophie used to ask where her father was," she whispered. "When she was little, I told her you traveled for work." Nathaniel felt his throat tighten painfully. Emily looked down at the marble floor. Then she got older and smarter. Her voice cracked gently. "Children notice when someone never comes home." Nathaniel stared at her helplessly. 10 years. 10 birthdays. 10 Christmas mornings. 10 years of missing bedtime stories and scraped knees and school recitals and ordinary moments fathers were supposed to be there for. A life stolen in silence while he built skyscrapers and companies and empty success. Then Emily slowly reached into the pocket of her catering apron. Nathaniel watched as she pulled out a tiny blue jewelry box worn soft at the corners from years of careful handling. The moment he saw it, something shattered open inside his memory. Nathaniel stared at the tiny blue jewelry box in Emily's trembling hands as though it carried the weight of another lifetime inside it. The ballroom around them dissolved into distant noise. The crystal chandeliers, the polished marble floors, the low hum of wealthy conversations trying not to sound curious. None of it mattered anymore. Emily opened the box carefully. The hinges gave a soft metallic click that somehow sounded louder than the orchestra. Inside rested a platinum ring identical to the one Nathaniel had worn for over a decade. But this one looked older somehow, softer around the edges from years of being held. Protected. Remembered. Nathaniel felt the air leave his lungs, because suddenly he remembered exactly where he had seen that little blue box before. A winter night. Snow drifting outside narrow apartment windows. Emily sitting cross-legged on the floor beside a second-hand couch, while candlelight flickered against the walls during a city-wide blackout. She had laughed when he handed her the tiny box, because he apologized 3 separate times for not being able to afford a bigger diamond yet. Nathaniel, she had whispered while touching his face gently, I would wear a candy ring if it came from you. The memory hit him with such force that he physically staggered backward 1 step. Emily noticed immediately. You remember, she breathed. Nathaniel pressed one trembling hand against his forehead. More fragments came crashing through the darkness inside his mind. Tiny pieces returning all at once. Her old piano near the window. Burned coffee because she always forgot it on the stove while practicing music. Dancing barefoot together in the kitchen while rain tapped softly against the fire escape outside. Then another memory surfaced. Sharp. Painful. Emily crying in his arms while holding a pregnancy test with shaking hands. Nathaniel had laughed through tears and kissed her forehead over and over while promising, we are going to be a family. His chest tightened violently. Oh my God, he whispered. Emily's eyes overflowed instantly. Nathaniel looked at her like a man waking from a 10-year nightmare. I remember the apartment, he said breathlessly. Brooklyn, near the old jazz club on Mercer Street. Emily covered her mouth as tears slipped down her cheeks. Nathaniel, you hated the radiator because it clanged all night. More memories. Faster now. You played Ella Fitzgerald records every Sunday morning while making pancakes. Emily began crying openly. Not loudly. Just years of buried heartbreak finally breaking apart beneath ballroom lights and orchestra music. Nathaniel looked down at the ring in the blue box. His voice shook. I asked you to marry me 2 weeks before the accident. Emily nodded through tears. You never came home after the business trip. Nathaniel closed his eyes. Suddenly, another memory exploded into focus. Rain smashing against a highway windshield. Headlights spinning. Metal screaming. Then white hospital lights. Strange faces. Doctors asking him questions he could not answer. Empty spaces where his life used to be. He opened his eyes again slowly. They told me I did not have visitors, he whispered. Emily looked away painfully. I sat in that hospital waiting room for 8 hours the first day. Nathaniel felt sick. Truly sick. Why would they keep you away from me? Emily gave a small broken laugh. Because I was 24 years old, pregnant, broke, and working nights at a diner. She looked around the glittering ballroom. And you were becoming Nathaniel Hale. The sentence landed harder than any accusation. Nathaniel suddenly understood something terrifying. During the months his memory disappeared, other people had rebuilt his life for him. Lawyers, executives, public relations teams, men in tailored suits who decided which pieces of his old world still belonged beside him. And Emily had not made the cut. A single tear slid down Nathaniel's face before he could stop it. They erased you, he whispered. Emily looked at him quietly through the ballroom light, reflecting in her tears. No, she said softly. They erased us. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. The orchestra continued somewhere behind them, soft piano notes floating through the ballroom like memories refusing to disappear, but Nathaniel barely heard any of it now. His entire body felt numb beneath the weight of what had just returned to him. 10 years. 10 years stolen by silence, confusion, and people who decided his past was inconvenient. Emily slowly closed the blue jewelry box with trembling fingers. The tiny metallic click sounded heartbreakingly final. I should go back to work, she whispered quietly. Nathaniel looked at her in disbelief. Emily, please. Her voice cracked softly. I cannot do this in front of all these people. Only then did Nathaniel fully notice the hundreds of eyes surrounding them. Wealthy guests pretending not to stare. Reporters whispering behind glowing phone screens. Investors exchanging nervous glances while holding untouched champagne glasses. The entire ballroom had transformed from celebration into spectacle. Emily lowered her eyes immediately, instinctively shrinking into herself beneath the attention. Nathaniel recognized that movement now. Years of learning how to disappear inside rooms where powerful people made others feel small. The realization filled him with shame. Emily adjusted the sleeve of her black catering uniform carefully before speaking again. Sophie does not know everything, she admitted quietly. I never wanted her growing up hating someone she had never met. Nathaniel felt his throat tighten painfully. Emily gave a small sad smile. So I told her stories instead. Nathaniel stared at her. Stories? Emily nodded once. About a man who loved jazz music and burned pancakes every Sunday morning because he got distracted dancing in the kitchen. A faint broken laugh escaped Nathaniel before he could stop it. Another memory surfaced instantly. Emily laughing breathlessly while smoke filled their tiny apartment because he forgot the stove again. For one beautiful second, he could almost feel that old life wrapped around him like warmth. Emily looked at him carefully then. You used to say our daughter would have your stubbornness and my eyes. Nathaniel's chest ached so deeply he almost could not breathe. Our daughter. The words no longer felt abstract. Somewhere down the service hallway stood a little girl carrying trays for wealthy strangers while believing her father forgot she existed. Nathaniel looked toward the corridor instinctively. Does Sophie know I am her father now? Emily shook her head immediately. No. Her voice became protective again. And you cannot tell her tonight. Nathaniel frowned. Why? Emily hesitated before answering. Because children build their hearts around consistency. If you walk into her life now and disappear again. She could not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Nathaniel understood perfectly. Emily had spent 10 years holding together a life built entirely on uncertainty. Rent payments, long shifts, missed opportunities. Raising Sophie alone while carrying the quiet grief of someone still haunted by unfinished love. Nathaniel suddenly realized how tired she looked beneath the ballroom lights. Not weak, not defeated, just exhausted in the way only survival can exhaust a person. Before he could respond, a familiar voice interrupted from nearby. Nathaniel, the investors from Seattle are asking if you are returning to the stage. It was Daniel Mercer, his chief executive assistant for nearly 12 years. Perfect gray suit, silver cufflinks, calm corporate smile. But the moment Daniel noticed Emily standing there, something flickered across his face. Recognition. Nathaniel saw it instantly. Emily saw it too. Her expression changed at once. Not fear exactly. Something colder. Older. You, she whispered quietly. Daniel's professional smile tightened almost invisibly. Emily. Nathaniel looked between them slowly. The air around them suddenly felt sharp enough to cut. Then Emily said 5 words that made Nathaniel's blood run cold. He was the one who stopped me. The temperature of the ballroom seemed to drop instantly. Nathaniel stared at Daniel Mercer while the soft orchestra music drifted awkwardly through the silence between them. For 12 years, Daniel had stood beside him through mergers, interviews, billion-dollar negotiations, and boardroom wars. Nathaniel trusted him completely. Or at least he had. Daniel adjusted the sleeve of his tailored gray suit with practiced calm, but Nathaniel noticed it immediately now. The tension around his mouth. The guarded look in his eyes. Tiny signs most people would miss. Emily did not miss them. You told me he did not want to see me, she said quietly. Her voice shook, but there was strength beneath it now. Years of buried pain finally finding air. Several nearby guests pretended not to listen while openly listening to every word. Daniel lowered his voice carefully. Emily, this is not the place. You looked me in the face while I was pregnant, she interrupted softly, and told me Nathaniel needed a fresh start. Nathaniel felt physically sick. Daniel glanced toward the surrounding crowd nervously. Nathaniel had severe memory trauma after the accident, he said carefully. The board was concerned about stress affecting his recovery. Emily laughed once in disbelief. So you erased us? I protected the company. The answer came too quickly, too honestly. Silence crashed over the space between them. Nathaniel stared at Daniel as though seeing him clearly for the first time in years. You made decisions about my family, he said quietly. Daniel straightened immediately. I made decisions during a crisis. Hill Dynamics was collapsing after your accident. Investors were panicking. The media was already circling rumors about your condition. Then suddenly there was a pregnant waitress claiming she was engaged to the CEO. Emily flinched visibly. Nathaniel's expression hardened instantly. Do not speak about her like that. The coldness in his voice stunned even the nearby guests. Daniel hesitated for the first time. Nathaniel stepped closer slowly. You told me there were no visitors. Because you did not remember her. Daniel snapped quietly. You could barely remember your own name some days. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Fragments of those months returned now in painful flashes. Endless white recovery rooms. Medication. Headaches so severe they blurred reality. Executives constantly surrounding him. Papers to sign. Statements to approve. A future rebuilt around efficiency instead of humanity. Daniel lowered his voice again. I thought I was protecting you. Nathaniel looked at Emily standing there in a catering uniform after 10 years of surviving alone. Then he thought about Sophie carrying silver trays through a ballroom full of strangers while believing her father forgot her existence. Protection. The words suddenly sounded disgusting. Emily wiped her tears carefully. I stopped fighting after Sophie was born, she admitted softly. I could not afford lawyers. I could barely afford rent. Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly. Every sentence carved guilt deeper into his chest. He had spent millions buying penthouses and private jets while his daughter grew up counting grocery money. Somewhere down the hallway, a serving cart rattled softly over marble tiles. The normal sound felt heartbreaking now. Nathaniel opened his eyes again slowly and looked directly at Daniel. You are finished, he said calmly. Daniel blinked. Nathaniel, effective immediately. His voice remained quiet, but it carried through the ballroom with terrifying clarity. Conversation stopped entirely now. You do not get to decide whose life matters based on stock prices. Daniel's face paled. After everything I built beside you. Nathaniel stared at him coldly. You built a version of my life that excluded the people I loved most. Emily looked stunned. Not triumphant. Just overwhelmed. Nathaniel turned toward her slowly then, the ballroom lights reflecting against tears still lingering in both their eyes. I cannot change the last 10 years, he whispered. But if you let me, I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve both of you. At that exact moment, Sophie appeared quietly at the end of the hallway holding a tray of untouched champagne glasses, completely unaware that her entire future had just changed. 3 months later, the penthouse overlooking Manhattan no longer felt cold. Morning sunlight spilled across hardwood floors instead of sterile marble silence. Jazz music drifted softly from hidden speakers near the kitchen, while the scent of pancakes and cinnamon filled the air. Nathaniel Hale stood at the stove wearing a navy sweater, with flour on one sleeve, completely focused on flipping pancakes without burning them this time. He failed anyway. Smoke curled gently upward from the skillet. Dad, Sophie laughed from the kitchen island. You are doing it again. The word still hit Nathaniel straight in the heart every single time. Dad. Not sir. Not Mr. Hale. Dad. He looked over at her and smiled helplessly while scraping another ruined pancake onto a plate already filled with failures. Sophie sat cross-legged on one of the tall kitchen stools wearing oversized socks and finishing homework beside a glass of orange juice. Morning sunlight caught the gold strands of her hair exactly the way it once caught Emily's years ago. Nathaniel still noticed details like that constantly now. Tiny things he missed for too long. Emily entered the kitchen carrying a stack of folded laundry, stopping immediately when she saw the smoke rising from the stove. Nathaniel, she said carefully, trying not to laugh. The alarm is going to start again. I had it under control, he protested. Sophie grinned. No, you did not. Emily finally laughed softly then. A real laugh this time. Not the guarded kind she used to hide behind exhaustion and survival. Nathaniel looked at her across the warm kitchen light, and still sometimes could not believe this was real. Healing had not happened overnight. The first weeks were awkward and painful and filled with conversations about years that could never be returned. There were tears, silences, hard questions. Sophie struggled at first too. One day she adored having her father around. The next day she worried he might disappear again. Nathaniel understood why. Trust rebuilt slowly, quietly, like restoring something fragile after a storm. So he showed up every day. School pickups, piano recitals, grocery runs, bedtime stories, ordinary moments. The kind wealth could never replace once lost. And slowly, the fear in Sophie's eyes began disappearing. Emily set the folded laundry down near the couch and looked out through the giant penthouse windows where New York shimmered beneath pale autumn sunlight. "You know," she said softly, "for years I imagined what I would say if I ever saw you again." Nathaniel walked toward her slowly. "Was it terrible?" Emily smiled faintly. "Some versions were." He nodded honestly. "Fair." Sophie watched them carefully from the kitchen island before speaking up. "Mom cried after she thought you forgot us." The room grew quiet. Nathaniel looked at his daughter. Sophie's blue eyes held no accusation now, only honesty. Children always saw truth clearly. Nathaniel crossed the room slowly and knelt beside her chair. "I know," he said quietly, "and I will spend the rest of my life being sorry for that." Sophie studied him seriously for a moment. Then she wrapped her arms around his neck without another word. Nathaniel closed his eyes tightly as he held her. Some wounds never disappear completely. But love, real love, learns how to build something beautiful around the scars. Across the room, Emily quietly wiped away tears while smiling at the same time. Outside the windows, Manhattan rushed forward with noise and ambition and endless hunger for more. But inside the apartment, none of that mattered anymore. Because sometimes the richest man in the room is simply the one who finally remembers what truly mattered all along.